Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review. Today I am reviewing CinderBeast by Lilith K Duat. This is a monster romance, which I am thrilled about. I do not get nearly enough of these in my inbox, and it is also a retelling of both Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty. Cinderella and Beauty and the Beast, not Sleeping Beauty. I honestly have no idea why I said that. Now, a couple of gigantic trigger warnings here before we begin. This book deals with a lot of suicide ideation and self-harm. It literally begins with Ellie waking up and being sad she didn't die in her sleep. So, please be aware of that going into this. It does fade a little bit as the story goes on. In fact, it goes a little bit into that the romantic relationship cured me aspect, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but it did lessen as the story goes on. But it opens with it and it's pretty severe. So I would, be careful with that. There's not really an out and out attempt in such. Not like a plan is not actually followed through on even in the attempt. So you're fine in that respect, but be aware of the other stuff going into it. And obviously there are steamy scenes because it's a monster romance and that's part of the thing. So this is all about a young woman named Ellie who was horrifically scarred in the fire that killed her father. Of course, father had a stepmother. Well, no, he didn't have the stepmother. Ellie had the stepmother. She's evil because of course she is. She has 2 daughters because of course she does. But in this case, she runs a brothel. Now, when I first heard that in the synopsis, I was like, oh, how are we going to deal with the sex work? Because sometimes it's iffy. This case, I would split the difference. It definitely was not using the modern language. It was still calling them whores, prostitutes, etc. But there is a sex worker character named Faye who is effectively the fairy godmother insert, and she is a sex worker and is portrayed very positively. She's also got some chaos queer vibes, and honestly, making your fairy godmother insert a chaos queer sex worker is next level thinking. I appreciate that, but there's not any other sex workers in the story. In fact, for some reason, the brothel felt kindly empty when Ellie walked through it. Like, Faye was the only sex worker that's named. She doesn't even walk by an unnamed sex worker in the hall. So in a weird way, it kind of felt empty. But Faye is again a very positive representation. Later on, the prince is like, wait, are you a sex worker? I mean, he doesn't use that word, obviously, but he's chill with it. He's not scandalized or whatever. Although I am kind of curious the vibe that I'm supposed to get about Fiona's the brothel in the town. And that's kind of one of my first big struggles with it, is there's not a lot of setup in the beginning for how other people view the world, or that anyone thinks anything is ever strange, because I guess Fiona's is just chill, everyone's chill with it, but also it still makes reference to guys sneaking there and being surreptitious about it. So I can't figure out if this is just a sex positive place where, oh yeah, the noble woman made the family manor into a brothel after her husband died. Girl boss. I can't tell. And also, there are some elements where I'm no, people really should be questioning things more, because there is a ball, because of course there is a big ball where you see the prince and a fully staffed palace. The prince is there, people can see him, the palace is fully staffed for this one night of the ball. And the rest of the year, it's just the prince that nobody sees and 2 servants. So, does no one think that's strange? Is no one hey, why do we only see the prince on this literal one day? And why does he literally hire a small army of people for just one day? No one thinks that's odd. And I think part of the problem comes from trying to merge the 2 stories together, because in Beauty and the Beast, the entire prince and palace together are from everyone's memory. No one remembers it at all, so they don't have any questions about it. But in Cinderella, the prince and his palace is the focal point. So trying to merge the 2, you end up with everyone's just chill, that they only ever see their legal ruler one day of the year. And he is the legal ruler. It's still the same setup of he's still legally in charge, although you never see him doing any princely duty things. And there's a lot of little things like that where the world building was there in outline, but it needed to be filled in more. How did the whole village think about Fiona, think about the prince and the ball? And it just needed a little bit more of that. We are affected by other people's thoughts about us, especially Ellie, because she is horrifically scarred on one side of her face and she's self-conscious about it. But in all honesty, it seems like the majority of the prejudice she faces is almost purely Fiona and her daughters. Like, you never get the gist from anyone else, literally anyone else, that they're bothered. So maybe it's just trauma directly from Fiona, I guess. Again, there's not like a Bonjour song scene where we can figure out what the town's vibe is. And also, my struggle with all of this is a lot of the characters seem to act like they know they're in a story and they know what has to happen next. So rather than acting in a way that would show what their preconceptions or their personal knowledge and motivations are, they're acting based on what is going to move the plot to the next point it has to reach per the retelling standards. For example, the evil stepmother flat out invites Ellie to go to the ball, which in one respect, it could be like a fun turn on the trope, because in every Cinderella retelling, the evil stepmother very famously forbids the Cinderella character from going, and the Cinderella character has to find some alternate secretive way to attend anyway and keep her stepsisters from finding out. But in this case, like, no, she's just invited, and then later on that invitation is rescinded anyway, kind of. I think it was meant to be rescinded. She still hides from them when she goes to the ball, and I wasn't sure why that was in the first place, if that was just supposed to be a little added cruelty. I would have liked it if, like, they had done a turn on the premise where she does invite her, but then you find out that Ellie was only invited because her burn scars made Fiona's daughters look better by comparison. Or the story brings up earlier that Fiona likes people knowing that Ellie is under her employ because she thinks it makes her look charitable to have a functionally disabled person under her roof and, like, quote unquote caring for her when she's not really. So you could have used one of those reasons, but no, it's just kind of a weird invitation extended then retracted. And the other struggle is we have the ball. And the one aspect I really liked was it's the prince that has to mysteriously run away at midnight for reasons. And it's after this little tryst they have in the gardens, which is admittedly not exactly love at first sight, but very close. So he has to run away for mysterious reasons, and she just runs blindly through the gardens, and suddenly, after the strike of midnight, stumbles across the strange beasts she's seen sometime in the woods. I wonder what the connection is. Like, I'm not going to say it exactly, but you know. So anyways, giant storm comes in the middle of the night. She falls ill. She has to spend the night at the palace. Makes sense so far. Where the meta-knowledge comes in is after that. She wakes up. She's there. Okay, cool. We helped the poor sick woman. Well, she's not even sick. She just fainted in the storm. She's here. There's no, like, set reason that she should stay in the palace afterwards. Now, obviously, in Beauty and the Beast, the reason is famously that the bell insert is forced to stay. Like, yeah, you're here now. Or, you know, she chooses to be, but it's also still kind of a forced thing. Like, you get what I mean. But in this case, there's no forced. Both of them just agree that this is a thing now. This is just a thing that happens next, which doesn't make a lot of sense because the prince has no reason to believe that Ellie doesn't have somewhere else to be, like, doesn't have a home, and Ellie has no reason to believe that the prince wants an extended house guest for no reason. And you can tell that the author knew there needed to be a pretense, but it wasn't set up at the beginning. In fact, later on, far later in the story, they're like, aha, they had both were ignoring the truth and just pretending to accept the pretense that she was the royal portrait artist. They never set that up in the beginning. It wasn't like they're both grasping at a reason for Ellie to stay and settled on that and then eventually grew out of it. She just stayed. She just hung around. The other thing I was really confused by was you don't get a lot of upfront information about the curse. Like, I think, you know, once the curse comes out, Ellie would be like asking questions. Like, you know, how long has this been happening? When did it start? Why? Like, she doesn't ask any of that. And obviously, like, a lot of cases, Belle doesn't either. But the story still gives you the narrative of why the curse began. And in this case, they give you late game, like, literal climactic scene. Aha, here's the reason for the curse. and then suddenly twisted, oh no, reveal, but we had no upfront exposition on why the curse was there in the first place, so the reveal doesn't feel like a reveal because it happened right after the initial exposition of what the curse was. Like, there needed to be a lot more upfront exposition closer to the beginning or the middle of the book. And I know people get iffy about exposition, but the thing is, you just need it. It's just a facet of books that you have to have. There are certain things you literally just can't show. In our daily lives, we do just ask questions and get flat out explanations of how things work. It's just a thing that can be done for good or for ill, but it is a necessity. And not having it until late in the game, not having that setup for why she's staying there in the first place, or the setup for what the curse even is, what does it do, how long has he had it, like, we don't get any of that. And that was a little bit frustrating. And again, the staff of the palace, that the entire palace is staffed for one night, for one party. And in one case, the next ball actually surprises Ellie, like she totally forgot it was coming. And I'm like, how is he staffing this thing? Like, it's not part of the magic. And I was thinking about, like, oh, it's Beauty and the Beast. No. I can't explain why I've got spoilers, but you learn for a fact, like, the guards and the people work here are hired, are, like, actual hired people, not just, like, part of the magic and in on it. Like, there's so much logistics, and I wish there was a little bit more, like, world building put into it that made the world feel a little bit fuller. And you could argue that maybe it was going for that kind of fairy tale aesthetic, but even fairy tales still build out, like, the vibe, the general vibe of the entire population with other characters. You know, the original fairy tale explained how the palace was still working and operating with where the servants went, which is they stayed and were turned into other stuff. So I wish there was a little bit more explanations of stuff, but obviously because this is a monster romance, people will be asking, well, Margaret, what about the steamy scenes? Steamy scenes were steamy. I was a little bit nervous that we were only going to be having steamy scenes with the prince in prince form. Thankfully, not the case. We have some nice, fun stuff. The monster fuckers will love it. I see all of you out there. And when I'm talking about monster romance, I usually like to do a kind of how beginner friendly is it, because as a genre, it can be very intimidating to newbies. This one, I would say, farther end, not deep end, not like level 3, you're jumping headfirst into the Marianas Trench of monster fucker books, but definitely more than entrance level, because there is like actual like teeth and claws and tail and stuff. So be on the lookout for that if you are new to monster romance. But if you love monster romance, you probably will enjoy the steamy scenes. They're pretty nice. A lot of time is skipped, and it didn't make a lot of sense to me because, like I said, again, it doesn't give you a lot of upfront information about their lives ahead of time. So it felt strange that we're just like skipping ahead when you could have been showing more. And the book is like just over 200 pages. So there was definitely room. I have read monster fucker books that were 500 pages, and the people that will read monster fucker books will read all 500 of those pages. It's a very dedicated fandom. So I would have liked a little bit more stretch to it. And in the end, despite the fact that it is a monster romance and I get so few of those, I had to give this one 2 stars. The outline was there, the setup was there, it just needed a lot more filled in. I ended up with a lot more questions to things that weren't supposed to be mysteries. I wish a lot of the characters were acting more like people or beings, I guess, with motivations and knowledge rather than things there just to further the plot. Like a little bit more setup in that. But regardless, I still think some people are going to enjoy this if you love yourself a good fairy tale retelling. I am intrigued to see more mashup fairy tale retellings. You know, someone tried, I don't know, Red Riding Hood and Rapunzel. Red Riding Hood goes to grandmother's house and ends up locked up in it and her hair starts to grow. I don't know. I feel like it could be fun. But regardless, thank you so much for watching. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.